The Book Essence Podcast. Episode 10. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Part 2.
Welcome back for part 2 of our deep dive into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
It's exciting to get into this part, right? Picking up from where we left off.
It really is.
Yeah.
In the first 10 chapters, we sort of got the foundation laid down for how to make yourself more likable and how to connect with people.
Exactly, yeah. Like becoming genuinely interested in others and remembering their names and being a good listener.
Smiling more, all that good stuff. Now, chapters 11 through 20 go even further and explore how to persuade and influence people.
But in a way that doesn't make anyone resentful.
Right, and that's a really key point. So chapter 11 starts with a warning.
A sure way of making enemies and how to avoid it.
That's a good one.
It got my attention too.
Yeah.
Carnegie says bluntly telling someone they're wrong is just asking for trouble.
Oh, I know that's true. My first instinct when someone says I'm wrong is always to get defensive.
And that's exactly the problem. Instead of considering the other side, you just try to protect your ego.
Which shuts down any chance of actually talking it through.
Right. So how do we avoid this trap? Carnegie points to people like Socrates, who never contradicted anyone directly.
Instead, he asked questions to guide them to discover things for themselves.
That's the famous Socratic method.
Which is brilliant because it doesn't make people defensive.
You let them figure out the flaws in their own thinking so they're more open to new ideas.
It's more like planting a seed of doubt than like attacking them.
Exactly.
And you know what? Carnegie himself used this. He tells this story about leading a colleague to realize he was wrong just by asking questions.
It's fascinating to see it in action, isn't it?
It really is.
And then there's Benjamin Franklin, another expert at persuasion. He just never disagreed with people directly.
Oh, I've heard about that.
Like he'd say, I may be wrong, but... Or, I see your point, but have you considered?
Those phrases are so clever because they invite the other person to have a dialogue.
Right. It's not like you're saying, I'm right and you're wrong.
It's more like, hey, let's explore this together.
And that change in tone makes all the difference. People are more likely to listen if you respect them.
So for our listeners out there, think about how you can use this. Imagine you're arguing with someone at work.
Or even with your family.
Instead of saying, you're totally wrong, try saying something like, I see where you're coming from, but have you thought about it this way?
It's subtle, but it can really change the whole conversation.
Okay, on to chapter 12. This one's about admitting when you're wrong.
The title is, If You're Wrong, Admit It.
Tough one for a lot of people, I bet.
It is. Our instinct is to defend ourselves, you know?
Oh, I know. I'm totally guilty of that.
We want to save face.
Right. But Carnegie says admitting your mistakes is actually more powerful.
Quickly and sincerely.
Yes. And there's a reason for that. When we try to cover up mistakes, it creates tension.
Distrust, too.
But when we're honest, it makes people trust us more.
It shows humility and a willingness to learn.
He tells this great story about a businessman who got out of a speeding ticket by just admitting he messed up.
He even made the officer laugh about it.
That's awesome.
It just disarmed the officer completely.
Yeah. And Carnegie has examples of historical figures who did this too.
Like Abraham Lincoln. He was known for his honesty.
Right. He admitted his mistakes openly, and it made people respect him even more.
Sometimes admitting our weaknesses can make us more relatable.
Makes us seem more human, I guess.
Exactly.
So, everyone listening, think about how you react when you make a mistake. Do you get defensive or own up to it?
What would happen if you tried admitting it more often?
Could it actually improve your relationships?
Definitely something to consider.
All right, let's sweeten things up a bit with chapter 13. A drop of honey.
Ooh, I like this one.
Me too. It starts with the proverb. A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall.
It's a great way to start, right?
So vivid. It really captures the idea that kindness works better than force.
People respond so much better to warmth than aggression, don't they?
Absolutely. We're much more likely to be persuaded by someone who's respectful and understanding.
Carnegie tells this story about a businessman who collected a debt not by threats, but by showing empathy.
The drop of honey approach.
It worked like a charm.
And this isn't just some feel-good philosophy. Carnegie says some of the greatest leaders use this.
People like Benjamin Franklin, he was famous for his ability to avoid arguments.
I can see how that would be helpful.
He knew that building good relationships was the key to influencing others.
And Theodore Roosevelt would write these really warm, personal notes to people before asking them for things.
He understood that a little bit of kindness could go a long way.
So how can we use this drop of honey idea in our own lives?
Well, think about the next time you have to have a difficult conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of getting all aggressive, try starting with a friendly tone.
Makes sense.
Express understanding and empathy before you make your request.
Find some common ground first.
Exactly. It's about creating a respectful environment where people feel heard.
And valued.
Right. And that leads us to chapter 14, The Secret of Socrates.
Now, this is where we get to the good stuff.
This one's all about the yes technique.
I've heard about this. You get people to agree with you, step by step.
By starting with questions they'll obviously say yes to.
Like leading them down a path.
It's a subtle way to guide the conversation in the direction you want.
So when people start saying yes, it creates momentum towards agreement.
Like building a staircase of yeses that leads to your desired outcome.
I love that analogy.
And of course, the chapter's named after Socrates, the master of asking leading questions.
Instead of saying you're wrong, he asked a series of questions that made people realize things for themselves.
And Carnegie gives us examples of how this works in real life.
Like in sales.
Imagine you're trying to sell something. Instead of asking, do you want to buy this, which might get you a no, you ask questions that lead to yes answers.
Give me an example.
Like, are you looking to save money on your energy bills? Or would you like a product that's more environmentally friendly?
Ah, I see. You're setting them up to say yes.
Exactly. You're subtly shifting the momentum of the conversation.
And it's not about tricking anyone. It's about finding common ground.
Creating a collaborative environment where the other person feels like they're part of the decision-making process.
Carnegie tells a story about a businessman who got his employees to accept a new policy using this yes approach.
He started with questions they all agreed with, and it made the transition much smoother.
So everyone listening, think about how you can use this technique. Can you rephrase your questions or requests to get more yes responses?
Can you find areas of agreement before bringing up the tough stuff?
It's a skill that takes practice, but it can be super effective.
Okay, chapter 15 might seem counterintuitive. It's called the safety valve in handling complaints.
Letting people vent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes people need to express their frustrations before they're ready for solutions.
Like letting off steam.
It's so important because if people feel like they're not being heard, their emotions can escalate.
And then it's harder to find a resolution.
But when you let them vent, it helps them calm down.
Makes sense. So they're more open to your perspective.
Carnegie tells a story about a customer who was furious about a delayed order.
No.
Instead of arguing, the businessman just listened patiently for 30 minutes while the customer yelled.
Wow.
And guess what? By the end of it, the customer was calm and willing to work things out.
Sometimes the best thing to do is just listen.
It's a reminder that acknowledging someone's feelings, even if you don't agree with them, can make a huge difference.
And of course, we can't talk about listening without mentioning Abraham Lincoln.
He was so patient.
The best listener.
He rarely interrupted people, even when he disagreed with them.
He knew that listening could often prevent unnecessary conflict.
So next time you're dealing with a complaint, try resisting the urge to interrupt.
Just listen.
Ask open-ended questions to encourage the other person to share more.
You might be surprised how well it works.
Okay, moving on to chapter 16, how to get cooperation.
How do we get people to work with us willingly?
Carnegie's answer is simple. Make suggestions instead of giving direct orders.
The power of suggestion. I love it.
We often forget about it, but it's so important.
I think it's because nobody likes to be told what to do.
Exactly. It makes us resist.
Even if the request is perfectly reasonable, a direct order can make people feel inferior.
And less motivated to cooperate?
It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Carnegie talks about Charles Schwab, a very successful businessman who rarely gave direct orders.
Instead, he'd ask things like, do you think this would work? Or what do you think we should do?
So brilliant. It empowers people to think for themselves.
It makes them feel like they're part of the solution.
And people are more motivated when they feel like they have some ownership over their work.
It taps into their intrinsic motivation.
Carnegie also gives some historical examples of leaders who use suggestions instead of commands.
Like Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
He often phrased his requests as suggestions.
And there's a story about an orchestra conductor who improved his musician's performance by asking, can you make that section sound even better, instead of criticizing them?
It's about inviting people to excel, not ordering them to.
So think about how you communicate with the people in your life. Do you tend to give orders, or do you invite input and suggestions?
What if instead of saying, do this, you said, what do you think about trying this?
Or would you be willing to help me with this?
It's about respecting people's autonomy and inviting them to be part of the process.
Now, Chapter 17 introduces a technique that I think we can all benefit from.
Tell me more.
It's called the praise, correction, encouragement sandwich, and it's a great way to give feedback without making people defensive.
Ooh, tell me more.
You start by giving genuine appreciation, then you offer the correction or suggestion for improvement, and then you end with more encouragement.
It's like a delicious communication sandwich.
I love that analogy.
Why does this work so well?
Because people are much more open to hearing criticism when it's sandwiched between genuine appreciation.
It's like you're saying, hey, I see your value and I believe in you, but here's an area where I think you could grow even more.
Carnegie gives examples of this in action. He talks about Abraham Lincoln, who was a master at acknowledging people's strengths before suggesting improvements.
Lincoln understood that people are more receptive to feedback when they feel respected.
And Carnegie also tells a story about a manager who needed to address a mistake made by an employee. He started by praising the employee's past successes and then gently suggested a course correction.
It shows that you value the person and their work, even if there's room for improvement.
It's not about tearing them down, it's about helping them grow.
And what's fascinating is that Carnegie even applies this to parenting.
He talks about a father who saw his son's behavior improve dramatically when he started praising his good qualities before addressing any misbehavior.
It's a reminder that this technique can work in all sorts of relationships.
So how can you apply this sandwich in your own life?
Right. How can we actually do this?
Maybe you need to give feedback to a colleague or have a difficult conversation with a friend or family member.
Start with praise, address the issue gently, and end with encouragement.
It can make those tough conversations much more productive.
Okay, Chapter 18, What Everybody Wants, reveals something really fundamental about human nature.
It's the simple fact that we all crave recognition and appreciation.
Oh, absolutely. We all want to feel valued and important.
And when our efforts are recognized, it motivates us to do even better.
It's like a plant that needs sunshine and water to thrive. Recognition is like that sunshine for our souls.
I love that.
And Carnegie says that encouragement is way more powerful than criticism.
Criticism can demotivate and create resentment, while appreciation builds confidence and inspires us to improve.
It's like the difference between pouring salt on a plant and giving it fertilizer.
What a great way to put it. Criticism can be harsh and damaging, while encouragement helps us grow.
And Carnegie has some incredible stories to illustrate this.
Like the story of a struggling factory that turned things around by simply starting to praise their employees.
Wow.
And there's the story of a child whose behavior improved dramatically when his parents focused on his good qualities instead of constantly scolding him.
It shows that it's better to catch people doing things right, not just focus on their mistakes.
Right. And Carnegie even talks about Napoleon Bonaparte, who understood that men would risk their lives for medals and recognition, not just for money or power.
It shows that the desire for appreciation is a deep human need.
So listeners, think about the people in your life, your coworkers, friends, family. How often do you express appreciation for them?
Yeah, think about it. Do you take the time to acknowledge their accomplishments?
And it's not about giving empty compliments. It's about offering genuine and specific praise.
Instead of just saying, good job, tell them why you appreciate what they did.
Like, I really appreciate how you handled that difficult customer. You were patient and understanding, and you found a great solution.
It makes people feel seen and valued.
Now, Chapter 19, an appeal that everybody likes, introduces a really interesting strategy for influencing people.
What is it?
Appealing to their nobler motives.
Like they're better angels.
Exactly. It taps into that core human desire to be seen as good and fair.
We all want to believe that we act with integrity.
Right. And Carnegie argues that if you can frame your request in a way that aligns with those ideals, people are more likely to say yes.
It's about tapping into their intrinsic motivation to do the right thing.
He says that people usually have two reasons for doing things. One that sounds good, and the real one.
Okay, I'm listening.
The sounds good reason is usually tied to their desire to appear virtuous or ethical.
So if you appeal to that, you're more likely to get them on board.
Exactly. He gives some really fascinating examples.
I bet he does.
He talks about J.P. Morgan, the financier. When he was dealing with a difficult business partner, instead of pressuring him, he appealed to his sense of fairness.
Clever.
And it worked. It led to cooperation.
That's amazing. It shows that understanding human psychology can be a real asset in persuasion.
Right. Instead of trying to force his will, Morgan created a situation where the other person felt good about doing what he wanted.
I like it. Any other examples?
Carnegie also tells a story about a store owner who handled a customer complaint by saying, "You seem like the kind of person who values fairness. How do you think we should resolve this?"
Ooh, that's good.
The customer, wanting to live up to that image of fairness, was much more willing to work things out.
It's a subtle way of acknowledging their values and making them feel like they're part of the solution.
And, of course, we can't forget Abraham Lincoln. He was a master of appealing to people's sense of justice and fairness.
Instead of accusing his opponents, he often framed his arguments in a way that highlighted their shared values.
It made people more receptive to his ideas.
So listeners, think about how you can apply this principle in your own life. The next time you need to persuade someone, try framing your request in a way that aligns with their values.
Instead of just focusing on your own needs, think about how you can present it as an opportunity for them to demonstrate their fairness or integrity.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
Now, we've arrived at the final chapter of this section of our deep dive. Chapter 20. The movies do it. TV does it. Why don't you?
Ooh, intriguing title. What's this one about?
It's all about the power of dramatization.
Making things more exciting.
Exactly. In today's world, with so much information and distraction, simply stating facts or making a logical argument isn't always enough.
We need to capture people's attention, right?
Right. We need to make our ideas more vivid, engaging, and emotionally compelling.
It's about recognizing that humans are emotional creatures. Our decisions are often driven by feelings.
Carnegie points to advertising as a perfect example.
Those commercials and movie scenes that stay with you long after you've seen them?
They use strong visuals, storytelling, and dramatic emphasis to make a lasting impression.
And it's not just advertising. Great leaders throughout history have used dramatization to inspire their followers.
Think of Julius Caesar's speeches or Napoleon's grand gestures.
It's about captivating people's imagination.
Carnegie tells a great story about a meat salesman who was struggling to sell expensive cuts of meat.
What did he do?
He tried explaining the quality and flavor, but nothing worked. Then, instead of just talking about the meat, he dramatically slashed into a piece with a knife.
Showmanship.
Exactly. He created a visual and emotional experience.
So he turned a boring transaction into something memorable.
And his sales skyrocketed.
Wow.
Another example is a company that wanted to emphasize hand washing.
Important topic.
Instead of just sending out a memo, they put a box of bacteria-covered cotton swabs in the lunchroom.
Ew.
It was a dramatic visual reminder of the dangers of not washing your hands.
That's effective.
It got people's attention and led to a big increase in hand washing.
So how can we use dramatization in our own lives?
Well, think about how you can make your requests or ideas more visual or emotionally engaging.
If you're giving a presentation, add a personal story or a bit of humor.
If you're trying to persuade someone, paint a vivid picture of the benefits of your idea.
Don't be afraid to use your voice and body language to create a more dynamic experience.
It's about going beyond the dry facts and figures and appealing to people's hearts as well as their minds.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into chapters 11 through 20.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
So many fascinating insights and practical techniques.
I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to put these ideas into practice.
Me too. It's a reminder that even small changes in our communication style can have a big impact on our relationships and our ability to influence others in a positive way.
And that's what makes Carnegie's work so timeless. It's about connecting with people authentically and building a better world together.
Well said.
It's fascinating how much this builds on the previous chapters, right? From avoiding telling someone they're wrong to admitting when we're wrong.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then adding that drop of honey element.
Like Carnegie is guiding us step by step towards better communication, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's about remembering that we all make mistakes, and a little humility can go a long way.
It makes you think back to those arguments where maybe a softer approach would have been better.
Exactly. Pausing before we jump in and try to force our viewpoint.
Speaking of which, Chapter 17 gives us a technique for offering criticism without putting people on the defensive.
A formula that will work wonders for you.
And that formula is
The praise, correction, encouragement sandwich.
I love that name. So you basically sandwich the criticism between positive things.
Right. You start and end with genuine appreciation.
It just makes the feedback so much easier to swallow, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When someone starts by pointing out your flaws, you immediately want to defend yourself.
But when they start with your strengths, It creates a much more positive atmosphere.
It's like saying, hey, I see your value, but here's an area where you could grow even more.
Carnegie gives some great examples. He talks about Lincoln, who was really good at acknowledging people's strengths before suggesting improvements.
Lincoln was a master communicator. He knew that respect is key to getting people to listen.
Carnegie also tells a story about a manager who needed to talk to an employee about a mistake.
But instead of jumping right into the criticism, he started by praising the employee's past successes.
It shows that you believe in the person, even when they mess up.
It's about helping them improve, not just tearing them down.
And what I love is that Carnegie applies this to parenting, too.
He says a father saw his son's behavior improve dramatically when he started praising his good qualities before addressing any misbehavior.
It shows that this technique can work in all kinds of relationships, not just at work.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners use this sandwich technique?
Yeah, give us some practical tips.
The next time you need to give criticism, maybe to a coworker or your partner, try starting with praise.
And then after you've given the criticism, end with more encouragement.
It can really make those tough conversations go a lot smoother.
Now, Chapter 18, What Everybody Wants, talks about something we all know deep down but sometimes forget.
That we all crave recognition and appreciation.
It's so true. When someone acknowledges our efforts, it makes us feel good.
And it motivates us to do even better.
It's like a plant that needs sunshine to grow. Appreciation is that sunshine for our souls.
I love that analogy.
And Carnegie says encouragement is so much more effective than criticism.
Because criticism can be demotivating and make people resentful.
It's like the difference between pouring salt on a plant and giving it fertilizer.
Perfect analogy. Criticism can be harsh and damaging, while encouragement helps us grow.
And Carnegie has some fantastic stories to illustrate this.
He talks about a factory that improved its performance just by starting to praise the workers.
Wow, that's powerful.
And there's the story of a child who behaved much better when his parents focused on his good qualities.
It's about catching people doing things right, not just focusing on their mistakes.
Exactly. And Carnegie even talks about Napoleon, who knew that men would risk their lives for medals and recognition.
Shows you how deep that desire for appreciation runs.
It's a fundamental human need.
So everyone listening, think about how often you express appreciation to the people in your life.
Do you take the time to acknowledge their accomplishments, big or small?
It can make a world of difference.
And remember, it's not about empty compliments. It's about offering genuine and specific praise.
Instead of just saying, good job, tell them exactly what you appreciate about what they did.
Like, I really appreciate how you handled that difficult situation. You were calm and found a great solution.
Now, Chapter 19, an appeal that everybody likes, is all about a very interesting strategy for influencing people.
It's called appealing to their nobler motives.
Like their better nature.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that desire we all have to be seen as good and fair.
I think we all want to believe we have integrity, right?
Absolutely. And Carnegie says that if you frame your request in a way that aligns with those ideals, people are more likely to agree.
Like you're giving them a chance to be their best selves.
And he says people usually have two reasons for doing things. One that sounds good, and the real one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The sounds good reason is usually about wanting to appear virtuous or ethical.
So if you appeal to that, they're more likely to go along with you.
Precisely. He gives some great examples, like J.P. Morgan, the famous financier.
What did you do?
He was dealing with a tough business partner, but instead of putting on the pressure, he appealed to the guy's sense of fairness.
Smart move.
And it worked. They were able to cooperate.
That's fascinating. It shows how understanding human psychology can be so helpful in persuasion.
Instead of forcing his will, Morgan created a situation where the other person felt good about doing what he wanted.
I love that approach.
Yeah.
Any other examples?
Carnegie also tells a story about a store owner who had a customer complaining.
Oh.
But instead of getting defensive, he said, "You seem like someone who values fairness. How do you think we should resolve this?"
Ooh, that's clever.
The customer, wanting to live up to that image of fairness, was happy to work towards a solution.
It's a subtle way of acknowledging their values and making them feel like they have a voice.
And of course, we have to mention Lincoln again. He was a master at appealing to people's sense of justice.
Instead of attacking his opponents, he would frame his arguments in a way that emphasized their shared values.
It made people more open to his ideas.
So listeners, think about how you can use this technique in your own life. When you need to persuade someone, Try framing your request in a way that speaks to their values.
Think about how you can present it as an opportunity for them to demonstrate their integrity or compassion.
Okay, on to the last chapter in this section, chapter 20. The movies do it, TV does it, why don't you?
This one's all about dramatization.
Making things more exciting.
Exactly. In a world full of distractions, just stating the facts isn't enough.
We need to grab people's attention, right?
We need to make our ideas vivid and emotionally engaging.
We need to appeal to their hearts as well as their minds.
Carnegie uses the example of movies and TV, which are masters of dramatization.
They use visuals, storytelling, and dramatic emphasis to create those unforgettable scenes.
And it's not just entertainment. Great leaders throughout history have used dramatization to inspire people.
Think of those epic speeches and grand gestures.
Carnegie tells a story about a meat salesman who was struggling to sell expensive cuts.
How did he turn things around?
Instead of just talking about the meat, he dramatically sliced into a piece with his knife, showing how tender and juicy it was.
Showmanship.
It's a great example of how a little bit of visual flair can make all the difference.
He turned a boring sales pitch into an experience.
And his sales went through the roof.
Another example is a company trying to get their employees to wash their hands more often.
Instead of a memo, they put a box of bacteria-covered cotton swabs in the break room.
Ugh, that's gross, but effective.
It was a dramatic visual reminder that really got people thinking.
So how can we use this idea of dramatization?
Think about how you can make your message more visual or emotionally engaging.
If you're giving a presentation, maybe add a personal story or some humor.
If you're trying to convince someone of something, paint a vivid picture of the benefits.
Don't be afraid to use your voice and body language to create a more dynamic and memorable experience.
That's what it's all about, connecting with people on an emotional level.
So there you have it, chapters 11 through 20 of How to Win Friends and Influence People.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
From the Socratic method to the praise, correction, encouragement sandwich, and from the power of appreciation to the art of dramatization, Carnegie gives us so many practical tools.
I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to put these ideas into action.
Me too. Even small changes in how we communicate can make a big difference in our relationships and our ability to influence others positively.
And that's what makes Carnegie's work so timeless. It's about connecting authentically and making the world a better place.
Well said. And on that note, let's move on to the final section of our deep dive. So much wisdom packed into these chapters, right? But it makes you think, how do we really live this stuff out in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to read about these ideas, but putting them into practice can be tough.
It can be. It's like, how do we go from theory to reality?
Well, I think it starts with really wanting to connect with people on a genuine level.
Not just trying to get what we want out of the interaction.
Yeah, shifting our focus away from winning and towards creating a space of respect.
Where everyone feels heard.
Right. And that takes effort, We have to pay attention to our intentions, our tone of voice, even our body language.
All those little things that make a difference.
Yes, they really do.
I know I've been guilty of being so focused on my own point that I completely miss the other person's perspective.
Oh, I've been there too. It's easy to get caught up in our own heads.
Especially when we feel strongly about something.
But sometimes the best thing we can do is just stop and listen.
Really listen.
And be willing to admit when we're wrong.
That could be hard, but it's so important.
It is. It shows that we're open to learning and growing.
And it creates space for true collaboration.
When people feel safe to share their ideas without judgment, that's when amazing things can happen.
It's like the difference between a debate and a dialogue, right?
Exactly. In a debate, it's all about proving you're right. But in a dialogue, everyone's trying to understand each other.
That reminds me of that Stephen Covey quote, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood."
Such a powerful reminder that listening is the foundation of good communication.
It's easy to think communication is all about talking, but really, it's about listening.
And not just hearing the words, but paying attention to the emotions behind them.
That's where empathy comes in.
Trying to see the world from the other person's perspective.
Putting ourselves in their shoes.
Recognizing that everyone has a story and everyone deserves to be treated with kindness.
It's amazing how these principles can have a ripple effect, isn't it?
It really is. When we approach our interactions with generosity and understanding, it inspires others to do the same.
It's like we're creating a wave of positivity that spreads outward.
In a world that can feel so divided, I think that's a powerful message of hope.
It really is. It reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, one conversation at a time.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to check out How to Win Friends and Influence People and see how these ideas can impact your life.
It's not about being perfect. It's about making a conscious effort to connect with people in a genuine and respectful way.
And that's something we can all strive for every single day.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we have.
Until next time, keep those principles of genuine connection and positive influence alive in your everyday life.